Imagine someone stealing your identity, not to ruin your life, but to replace you, to wear your name, spend your money, and build a life that looks exactly like yours. And then one day, you disappear. In 2008, a woman's body was found in a Barcelona apartment, and at first it looked simple, until the police realized something impossible. The woman who booked the room and the woman who passed away inside of it were both using the same name. Only one of them was real, and the other had been planning it for years. Our story begins in Barcelona, Spain, and it all started with a missing person report. A man named Carlos had reported his wife missing on February 24th, 2008. Her name was Ana, and she'd been MIA since February 18th. The last Carlos had heard from Ana was that she was going to meet a friend, but now she wasn't showing up for work, wasn't answering her calls or texts, and this was concerning. Well, the thing is, Carlos would be in for a shock, because the police already had an unidentified woman's case on their hands. It was pretty recent. The woman was also found in February of 2008, so the timeline matched with Ana's disappearance. And speaking of matching, the name matched too. The unidentified woman was found in a short-term rental apartment in Barcelona, but she wasn't found alive. She was long gone before the police ever reached the apartment complex. See, on February 21st of 2008, a cleaning woman was just starting her workday in Barcelona. She was in charge of cleaning the rental rooms, so the cleaning lady had a key to the room and she opened the door and let herself in. The lady was doing her usual work. In fact, she hadn't even really started her workday, and it turned out to be one of the worst and most traumatic days of her life. As the poor woman walked into the living room, she was stopped cold. There was something, or someone in the room, and they were not moving. It was a woman. She was no longer alive, and the scene was eerie. Things had definitely taken a turn that fateful morning. The cleaning lady took one look at the scene, which looked like an obvious crime scene, and she ran straight outside and called the police and the higher-ups of the complex. There was a body in one of the rooms, and now the police had a very complex and bizarre case on their hands. They just didn't know it yet. When the police arrived at the apartment, the first thing they did was survey the room, which at first glance looked ordinary. There didn't seem to be any major signs of a struggle, save a black wig on the couch, some black boots on the floor, and some jewelry. There were no clothes in the apartment. There were no belongings in the apartment, nothing. It really looked like someone had come in, placed the body and a couple of random things in the rental room, and just left. The front door also didn't show any signs of forced entry. There was a glass and a drink bottle that had been opened on a dining table off to the side. But other than that, the place looked very clean, undisturbed, and unsettling. The police didn't have any way of figuring out who this woman was. At one point, they even theorized that perhaps the woman's passing was self-inflicted. But before the police could even scratch the surface, they needed identification. So they turned to the landlord of the apartment, and thankfully, there were cameras around the entrance. According to the landlord, he remembers seeing a middle-aged woman with shoulder-length black hair booking a rental apartment on February 18th. The name under which the room was booked was Ana Paez. So the police drew the most obvious conclusion. The deceased woman in that apartment was Ana Paez. But here's the thing, when the landlord looked at Ana, currently in the apartment, and the woman he remembered booking the room, also Ana, there was something different about these two women. Now, maybe it wasn't too significant, because who really notices such small details about a person they just met? But one thing was for sure, the landlord didn't think that the deceased woman and the woman who booked that room were the same person. It was just a hunch, but this caused the police to tumble down into a very confusing Pandora's box. Well, the police took note of everything, and they went back, and 3 days later, they came across Carlos's missing person report about his wife, Ana. The police thought that the odds were just too coincidental, so they called Carlos in and asked him to identify the woman that they'd found in the rental room. Tragically, Carlos positively identified the deceased woman as his wife, 35-year-old Ana Paez. This was most definitely Ana. So Ana was a fashion designer working at a company. She was married to Carlos for 7 years at the time of the case, and she was on the brink of starting a family with him soon. She was very successful. She lived a comfortable life and was pretty cheerful, optimistic, and overall a caring woman. She was friendly with everyone she met, and she had a warm and kind personality. She was driven too, and designing clothes was her passion. Carlos was obviously devastated, especially since he was the one who had to identify his wife. So now, he wanted answers. He wanted to know how she ended up here and what went down. And he wanted the person or people behind Ana's attack to be punished. So the police, well, they had a confusing uphill case on their hands, and the details were numerous. For instance, the police found traces of male DNA on Ana's body. This turned the case in a different direction. Was it possible that Ana was meeting someone at the apartment? Well, the DNA was tested, and the police were in for a wild ride, because there was DNA, actually, from 2 different men on Ana's body. Things were getting even more confusing. The police turned to Carlos for any information. Was Ana being unfaithful? Did Carlos know anything about it? Well, Carlos vehemently denied the character assassination of his wife. Ana was faithful to Carlos, and not once did he ever suspect her of having extramarital relationships with other men. She was as clean-cut of a person as you could possibly be, and there was no room for Carlos to be wrong. But DNA is DNA, so where did it come from? And will it lead to Ana's possible murderer? Well, from this revelation as well as the autopsy report, it seemed like Ana lost her life in a dangerous, intimate encounter, possibly with 2 different men. But in order to verify this theory, the police had no choice but to go back to the apartment and search for even more clues. The first thing that stood out to investigators was the fact that the apartment was so clean. They'd noticed it before, but now all of their attention was on the cleanliness of this place. It looked like every surface, every inch of that apartment was wiped down. But by whom? The 2 men whose DNA had been left behind, well, it was possible they did it, but it was too early to say for sure. The police thought that Ana's case would quickly turn into a cold one, since they literally had no leads at this point. But that was until the police checked Ana's bank transaction details, and from there, they found something very bizarre. Because on February 18th, the day that she was last seen, someone had withdrawn 800 pounds from her account. Nothing alarming, especially at first glance, because it could have just been Ana herself. But the police checked the time, and it was 9 in the morning. And they checked the timeline given by Carlos, and Ana was at work from 9 to 6 that day, and she didn't leave the office once. There were tons of employees who could vouch for that. So who was at the ATM? Well, the police checked the ATM footage, and they were floored. It was a woman with dark hair in her 40s. She was tall and lean. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but the apartment landlord gave the same description of the woman named Ana who came to book that room for the next 2 days. When the police showed this picture to the landlord, he confirmed, yeah, that's the woman he saw, that's Ana. So what the landlord was saying was true. Ana, who was in the living room, and Ana, who booked the room, were 2 different people. But how? And who was this woman? This was all getting very confusing quickly. So soon enough, the police showed the photo of this new Ana to Carlos for some answers. And he actually knew who this woman was, and she wasn't Ana. Her name was Maria Angeles Molina. She went by her nickname, Angi, and she was a former work friend of Ana's. And she was the same friend that Ana was due to meet on the day that she went missing. Now, with all of this laid out, the 2 Anas, one of which wasn't actually Ana, this was getting really weird for everyone. I mean, sure, Angi was Ana's friend, and even a coworker at one point. But what was going on, and why was Angi using Ana's card at an ATM? And why did she book the hotel under Ana's name and not hers? And what's with the wig? I say this because Angi didn't have black shoulder-length hair. Ana did. So it seemed like Angi was trying her best to look like Ana. But why? Well, the police needed to talk to Angi and figure out how she fit into this puzzle, because at first, they didn't suspect Angi too much. They just needed her version of events, as she was the last person to have seen Ana alive. So they called her in for an interview, and right away, they were stunned speechless at the way Angi unfolded Ana's life. According to Angi, Ana was a vixen, an unfaithful woman who enjoyed having secret relationships with men in rental apartments and hotel rooms. This was news for Anna's family. Angi claimed that whatever happened to Ana was likely a result of her wild spirit, and somewhere during the act with these two suspicious unknown men, she lost her life. Angi acted like she wasn't the slightest bit surprised by this. Well, the police made her believe that they were eating up her story, but they weren't. And they needed to do their own homework, too, because it turns out Ana worked in the HR department at her own clothing company. And being in this department meant that she had access to classified and personal records of everyone who worked there. And then the police found out that Angi had Anna's credit card in her possession, and she had taken multiple loans as well as life insurance policies in Anna's name, which totaled nearly £1 million. She had forged Anna's signature on every single document, and it all traced back to Ana, not Angi. This all happened between 2006 and the end of 2007, but why? Well, the police thought of one thing only. Angi loved money that wasn't hers to spend, and she saw a chance to con Ana with her dirty tricks. And the easiest way to do that was to impersonate Ana on paper and in real life, too. The police were honestly shocked by what they were finding out about Angi. What started as a paper trail from seemingly insignificant ATM footage was now a pivotal puzzle piece in Anna's case. Angi was using Anna's identity, her information, and her money to supplement a lifestyle that she enjoyed. It was really bizarre because, to be fair, Angi didn't make a lot of money. She was bouncing around jobs. She was a lawyer at one point, then a mentor, and then something else. She changed jobs like she was changing clothes, and then when people looked at her living situation, it was worlds apart. Angi lived a lavish lifestyle in a Barcelona home, which could amount to being a mansion, if you ask me anyway. She drove expensive cars, wore luxury brands, but how was that possible? Angi wasn't making nearly enough money to maintain her mansion, let alone splurging on expensive clothes and cars and bags. What was going on? Well, the police quickly found out that the house Angi was living in belonged to a man by the name of Juan Antonio Alvarez Litbin. He was Angi's husband, but let me rephrase that because he was actually Angi's late husband. 20-year-old Angi had met 34-year-old Juan on vacation in Palma de Mallorca. He was a successful Argentine businessman, and he was beyond rich. But Angi, on the other hand, was the daughter of a taxi driver in Barcelona, and she had nothing but dreams of living a life of luxury. The two, Angi and Juan, would spend their time vacationing together multiple times a year, living in big houses, being surrounded by maids and servants, and shopping with no plans of dropping. But this was a dream, a lie, and Angi was living in a reality where she could barely make ends meet. Angi had to lie to Juan, telling him that she came from money, but in reality, she had turned to adult work in order to finance her expensive spending habits, and Juan was none the wiser. But pretty soon her lies caught up with her and Juan found out. But naturally, he was beyond furious. He was devastated. But somehow, the two still ended up getting married. But it would soon come to light that Angi wasn't even in love with Juan. She was just in love with spending his money. She was addicted to spending. She wanted everything, and it was so bad that it was to the point where Juan's massive fortune started to cave in. And worse yet, Angi was also cheating on Juan with multiple men because she was still involved in adult work and was piling up money from every and any direction, using any form of coercion she could. Well, Juan finally had enough, and he wanted a divorce and full custody of their daughter. But as you might have seen coming, that divorce was put to a halt because in November of 1996, Juan was found unresponsive in his home. His death was ruled a self-inflicted poisoning, and Angi probably spun some sort of story about Juan being depressed and having dark thoughts after learning of his wife's infidelity. So the house, the fortune, the cars, the wealth, everything went to Angi, as she was the beneficiary if Juan were to ever pass away. But Angi didn't need any grieving time because she'd already found a new man, a chemical engineer with whom she'd been spending a lot of time with. In the present time, these circumstances felt really odd to the police. Juan's passing at a very convenient time, the bitter truth of Angi and Juan's marriage, and the fights over money and Angi's reckless spending. It was not a coincidence anymore, especially not with Anna's mysterious passing. But had it not been for Anna's inexplicable passing, the police would not have dug through Angi's life and figured out all the lies, and some really disturbing details about her. The pieces were falling into place for the police, and the picture was terrifying. Angi, a woman who called Ana her friend, who earned her blind trust, was just after Ana's money, and she didn't hesitate to do something illegal and immoral to get what she wanted. Angi was a money-hungry, materialistic woman who would stop at nothing to get that money, to get more wealth and more lavishness. And she didn't stop because the police were now slowly realizing that Angi had been planning this whole thing in order to stage Ana's passing to look like some sort of freaky night gone wrong. But remember the DNA from the two men that was found on Ana's body? Well, the police sent it in for testing, and while they were knee-deep in Angi's life and history, the results came out, and the DNA belonged to two men who were adult workers. Now, I swear, with every piece of evidence, things just get wilder, but the police managed to track these men down. And when they showed them pictures of Ana, whom the men didn't recognize at all, they were genuinely unaware of what was going on. They had no idea who Ana was. She was a stranger to them. Well, the police then showed them a picture of Angi, and right away they recognized her. They recognized her because she requested something that the men just didn't hear often. Angi stood out to them. The men remembered Angi coming to them and asking them for, well, not their services, but their fluids. She would pay them very handsomely, and all the men needed to do was give Angi what she wanted. Now, even though this request was bizarre, the men didn't think much of it. So, if you put the pieces together, Angi had literally planted the DNA she got from practical strangers on Ana's body and made the scene look like she was involved in physical relations with two men behind her husband's back. In reality, neither the two men nor Ana knew anything about Angi's meticulous plan. This just confirmed Angi's thought process to the police, and they were now also sure that Ana's passing was not accidental, or Juan's for that matter. Angi had been dating a chemical engineer who could have easily gotten her the toxic substance for Juan. Combine that with the fights and the crumbling marriage, and a life insurance policy taken out by Angi in Juan's name, which she wasn't able to cash out on, thank God. It was all very telling. All the signs were there, but right now the investigators could do nothing about Juan. The case was too old and too much time had passed, and it would be impossible and very time-consuming to pin everything back to the 90s and the people involved during that time. So right now, they just needed to see Ana's case through first. There was more than enough evidence to convict Angi for her heinous and material-driven actions. There was a clear motive, there were signs, and there was Angi herself flaunting Ana's money, her documents and everything else, pretending to be her and spending Ana's hard-earned money. Even though Angi fought to the end and maintained that she didn't have anything to do with Ana's attack, the case was clear as day. Angi lured Ana that fateful day to a random apartment so that no one would be suspicious and nothing could be traced back to her. She booked the room in Ana's name, not hers, so that she wouldn't be suspected. Angi was smart, but not the smartest, and her greed for someone else's money finally took her down. Now, I don't really know what happened that day, since Angi was not cooperative at all during the trial or the investigation, but it's believed that Angi tampered with Ana's drink, and once she was unconscious, she carried out the crime to the end. She then proceeded to stage the apartment to make it look more substantial and in line with her story. She got rid of her disguise, her tracks, and everything else, and left Ana in that cold and unknown apartment, thinking that she'd gotten away with murder, and allegedly for a second time. Angi then continued to use Ana's money until she was caught, and then handwriting analysis was done. The forged signatures of Ana matched those signed by Angi, stealing Ana's credit card, her identity, and all of her personal information. It all came together, and it was all just chilling. And it really makes you wonder if you can trust anyone. And it's still unclear whether Ana knew about any of this or not. And considering that Angi was recently fired from her job, it makes you wonder, did it have something to do with maybe her stealing Ana's identification? Did Ana ever check her bank statements or her transactions? And did she even know about Angi's actions when she went to meet her on that fateful day? Maybe did a fight break out? We'll never know. These are haunting questions that will probably never be answered, and that's one of the most perplexing parts about this case. But in the end, Maria Angeles Molina was taken to court for her actions, and she stood by her innocence. She had an excuse for everything, but the evidence didn't lie. The court was convinced that Angi was responsible for Anna's attack, and what made this case so much worse is the fact that Angi tried to tear Anna's reputation apart and tear her image to shreds. It's scary to think that this woman was regarded as a friend in Anna's eyes. But Angi was no friend. She was a con artist who took advantage of Anna and her trust. She went out of her way to make Anna's money hers, and she didn't hesitate to end her life for this very reason. Angi was facing charges of murder and forgery, and ultimately she was found guilty of the charges against her. But the sentencing is where no one was satisfied at all. The Spanish court of law sentenced Maria Angeles Molina to pay only 18 years of her life for the murder of Ana Paez. 18 years for the damage she inflicted. As for forgery, she was sentenced to another 4 in prison, and in total she was given 22 years. And let's not forget that she might have done the same thing she did to Anna with her late husband. But for obvious reasons, she wasn't convicted for that. But here's where things get completely devastating. Angi then appealed her conviction, and not long after her sentencing, get this, her sentence was reduced. She would now only spend 18 years in prison for the murder of Anna and for stealing her identity. This was unbelievable. To think that the worst people on this planet end up with such luck is just crazy. But to make matters even worse, in December of 2023, Angi was granted something called second-degree parole. Mind you, she's a murderer, and Anna's attack wasn't her first rodeo, allegedly. But basically, Angi was granted access to the outside world again. But luckily, that was short-lived, because in March of 2025, Angi was arrested again, and this time, she was thrown in prison permanently. But for what crime, you might ask? Well, Angi was out on this second-grade parole and was caught trying to hire a hitman. She still had someone she needed gone. There are no words for this woman. Even after all this, she was still spending her time plotting ways to end the lives of others. Luckily, her plan wasn't carried through, though, and the police caught up to her, imprisoning her once again. What's going to become of this most recent attempted hit is still unknown. But what we do know is that Angi is back in prison, and I just hope she stays there indefinitely. The thing is, Anna was a woman who worked hard. She believed in forgiveness, trusting people, and so many other amazing virtues. But her end was the most tragic, especially when you consider that it was at the hands of someone that she called a friend.